everyone, welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today I'm going to talk about how to draw hands. So our hands can be pretty complicated. There's a whole lot happening here, but they don't have to be. There's a lot of basic shapes that our hands have that we can sort of break it down into its simpler form. That makes it a lot easier to draw. One of the biggest sort of mistakes I see, though, with a lot of artists is making the hands too small. And one way to sort of combat that is looking at and relating the hand to the face that you've drawn. If you're drawing out a full figure and you're drawing out some action, the palm of the hand, so not including the finger, but the palm of the hand should reach from your chin to the tip of your nose. This space is how long that palm should be. And that sounds a little crazy, but it works. The longest finger is going to be a little shorter than that, but that's a way to sort of make sure you're making the hands as big as they should be in a composition. So, all right, so let's get started. All right, so when you're drawing out a hand, now this is obviously that sort of finished product, just my hand sort of held up. But if I wanted to take a look at this and figure out how to draw it from a starting point and breaking it down by its basic shapes, I would draw it more like this, right? So the palm is almost squarish with the top of it being a little wider than the base, but very square-like with rounded corners. And then I have a triangle, so this part's a bit squarish, right? And then I've rounded the edges. And then we have a triangle here where the thumb connects in. And then everything else is just ovals. We have an oval, an oval, an oval, an oval. And so all the ovals kind of connect together, right? And so when we're done doing all of that, when I pop that hand back on, you'll see that it's almost the same. We're almost overlapped exactly. But then you take away all the shapes and you have a hand. So I think it's probably a lot easier to think about it as individual shapes, right? Like think about the palm as that sort of square and draw that squared off shape. And then how the thumb connects with a triangle. And when you're drawing out the fingers, especially on a hand that like this one where I have the fingers sort of splayed out, not all of the fingers are going to be on the top section of the palm, right? So, I mean, here's that top square. And this finger is kind of straddling the side and the top. And so it's obviously going to be different as you do different shapes, but that's a way to sort of break it down so it's not as daunting, it's not as complicated. And then I also like to add these little lines here. So this tells me how far down the bulge of the, in the palm of your hand, that bulge where your fingers are coming together into that joint, how far that should come. And then there's a little bit of a ridge extending down from the little finger where it's going to be a little higher before your palm sort of sinks back into the middle, right? Like there's that dip there. And so I also like to kind of include that to sort of help ground it, as this is sort of that thick section, and then you have the center of the palm through here where you're going to add all of the details and the lines of the hand later, right? So when you are drawing the arm, it's just kind of it's almost the same you would do the way that you would do the fingers, except it's bigger and longer, so it would come off in a bigger way, but that's all there is to it. So we're going to look at several different hand shapes and sort of break it down by its basic shape. All right. So this second one, right, we have our fingers kind of bending over, but the same thing, we start with a square, and we round the corners on that square. And then from there, we add oval, oval, oval as the fingers come up. It's not an exact oval here. This one almost turns into, let's go back a little bit. Right, like this one has that more jagged edge, so it's more like a, not quite oval, another oval. So we have those shapes once again sort of coming about, and then we can take those shapes and draw the hand, right? And then you have the hand coming through. You can see the squared off shape here that it had with the rounded edges, right? So we have that kind of coming straight down instead of leaving room to jut up, but you can have it just coming down here, which would still leave room for the triangle here of the thumb. Whatever's easiest for you. I found it easier just to come down and then sort of come over, but again, just break it down by its basic shape. How would you create that shape? And then you can sort of string those shapes together to create the finished product of the hand, or the finished drawing. So those two, the first two we had very squared off hands, but I wanted to show what it would look like if we were doing something different. If we were doing like a peace sign, the hand isn't actually going to be a squared. We're going to lose some of those hard angles, and you can see here that's exactly what's happened. It's almost an oval based with a triangle on top. So maybe that's better to think about it. You have an oval for the hand, and then instead of having the oval come all the way up, you're going to have that come down instead. And then again, we have, you know, the ovals of the fingers as they come around. And so that's going to look like this when we're done, right? So the thumb is covering the ring finger there, so we wouldn't be able to see it as much. We can see a hint of it here, just that little hint that there's the ring finger coming in, but because of this angle, the thumb is going to hide the rest of it. You would also be able to see some of it coming down, but I didn't really need to show that here. That would happen if I were doing the shadows and highlights on it. Enough of it's here that you can shadow and highlight it. So just like you do with any other shadows and highlights, right, then you still break it down by that form. You're still dealing with squares and ovals and triangles as you're shadowing and highlighting. So keep it broken down into those basic shapes as you're adding shadows and highlights. And then I did one more just to kind of look at the back of it if someone were making a fist. And this one is a bit easier in my opinion, right? Like you still have that kind of squared shape that's smaller at the bottom than the top. You round the edges just like you always do. And then you add these little loops for the fingers, these oval shapes for the fingers. And what you get is a clenched fist. Now I also, when I'm sketching, which I don't add when I'm adding the basic shapes, I like to add these little lines here, and that's just the dips that you'll see in the back of your hand because of your bone structure. All right, so I wanted to kind of show a hand that I have added shadows and highlights. It's based on that first sketch. So that first sketch was this one here. So if we take that hand, how do we add shadows and highlights to it, right? Well, first is, again, I design on black, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to take that basic sketch and fill it in, right? You don't see a lot of details, but that basic sketch has told me where to add in all the skin tone. And then we're going to add the shadows and highlights. So you can see, you know, you can break it down by that shape, right? Like you have all these ovals, so you're going to have stronger highlight that is going to go into a slight shadow here because they're going to connect back to the finger. You're going to have that highlight that's going to connect back to the finger, highlight that's going to connect back to the finger, and so you have these ovals at play. Now that line that we did, those two lines are going to come at play here, but these, the way I shadow and add shadows and highlights is they're kind of like circles. They're like individual circles within that section. So from that line where I dictated that joint, I'll shadow them as if they're circles. So you have the highlight coming here and then the shadow coming underneath. And then this is kind of like shadowing it like an oval. And then we have the triangle of the thumb. And then the thumb would kind of be going off into shadow. So I have the highlight here and then it tips into shadow because that thumb tip leans away from us. So it's not going to stay in highlight as it sort of rounds over. So all right, so that's how you sketch a hand. I hope that makes it a lot easier and that it made sense. If you did like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, please comment down below. And I will see you all next Thursday. Take care.